hello, everyone catching the recording, and we may have some people join us live as we go. We'll see how that goes, but we're here for a special fireside chat. I want to thank Amy. You were kind of the impetus behind that, about bringing us together. So Amy, why don't you tell us about yourself, and then I can tell people about myself, and then we can jump into some of the pre-submitted questions.
That sounds great. Yeah, so I'm Amy Lajiness. I'm a highly sensitive person, HSP, mom of two boys, ages 5 and 9. And I have a couple of businesses. So one of them, one of the hats I wear is a therapist for highly sensitive and empathic people, as well as parents of all ages, of young kids, of pregnant people, and parents of older kids. And as part of that, I was working a lot with highly sensitive parents and noticing how that interacted, how those two traits interacted with one another. And so I also have a coaching and course website called Highly Sensitive Parenthood that I've developed a couple of resources for parents of highly sensitive children and parents who themselves are highly sensitive. So kind of just supporting people who are empathic, highly sensitive, experiencing the world in different ways. And yeah, it's a real passion of mine personally and professionally. So I practice out in California. My coaching and HSP parenthood business is worldwide, but for my therapy practice, it's for California residents. And that's inner nature therapy. Yeah.
Awesome. And for myself, I'm Liz St. Jean, and I have the Mint Ambition. So it's a coaching, leadership, career coaching, lots of different things. Sometimes I say it's a Venn diagram of Brene Brown meets LinkedIn meets Sheryl Sandberg kind of combination. So I do a lot of work with quietly ambitious leaders is the phrase I landed on. So we have a lot of people who are highly sensitive or empathetic or otherwise sensitive souls that are in my community, because my community is filled with people who are ambitious. They do succeed and they want to succeed, but they're not the kind of person that wants to be really braggy about it or, seeks the spotlight or seeks attention. They want to feel appreciated, but they're not really seeking special recognition, going to the stage in front of 1,000 people. Rather, they want to do it kind of more quietly, modestly, gracefully, for a lot of the words that I hear from people. The biggest thing for me that I notice with my people is that they want to go into leadership for all the right reasons. So they want to do it because they want to make things better for others. They've either had an amazing boss in the past, or they've had a really difficult situation, like a very painful situation, and they don't want others to have to experience that. So that's why they want to get into leadership. So at the same time, because my community is quite sensitive, and a term that I fell in love with that I heard from a Canadian psychologist years ago, I read his book, Brian Little is his name, is the term high self-monitor. So people who are very aware of how they impact others. And so what happens is that the higher self-monitor is, they're very empathetic, right? Very high EI, very high emotional intelligence and EQ skills. But they're also so attuned to it that it's very easy to start making up stories in our minds about what others are thinking. And we're so often right that sometimes you can be worried, you make up a false story, but you also know that you're often right. So that can be a challenge for my community, is also trying to be like, well, what if they are thinking about this about me, and they might be right? You don't want to assume that they're wrong, but we're not always right in the stories we make up in our heads, because our brain is very good at making up stories.
I've heard people describe it or ask the question, is this my anxiety speaking, or is this my intuition? And that is, there's not necessarily a singular answer to that question. I think it comes with discernment and listening and your own experience with that. But yeah, I love how you describe your community. I think we connected because there was some overlap, definitely distinct niches, but like you, I do work with some with professionals who have maybe come across some challenges working in a corporate environment or in these higher powered, higher level jobs, where their skills are maybe not quite as visible because of the environment. Still absolutely invaluable and powerful and important, but maybe not as flashy as others might project out there. So yeah, I loved hearing more about that. So that is how we connected. And I said, wow, I have had a couple of clients like that, a few clients like that as well, for whom that is a challenge. And I love too, I actually haven't heard that phrase, the high self-monitoring, before, but that is absolutely something I see a lot of. And I like that it frames it as largely positive thing as well, but that we can get into trouble with it when we start letting the voices and the narratives of others crowd out our own intuition or our own needs, and prevent us from setting those boundaries and creating the life that we really need. So
Yeah. It's very similar to, there's another concept that comes out of actually the political science arena, but I think it blends really nice into this conversation. And I'd be curious about your thoughts on the overlap with sensitivity as well. And it's the idea of hedgehogs and foxes. Have you heard of this before?
No.
Yeah, it's a good one. I can't remember how, like, the book is in the 90s, I think it's from, with Philip Tetlock, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been years since I read it, but the concept always stuck with me. And the idea was that, you know, he was looking at how people make decisions in the political arena, like political decisions. And what he found was that you could kind of group people into hedgehogs and foxes. He says hedgehogs are the kind that they have a belief and they basically never change their belief of the world. Like that's the hedgehog, right? Little quills kind of pointing out. They just don't change it. And like, no matter what information comes at them, they don't change. Like, this is my view. This is what I know. This is what I decide. He says they're very good at making decisions in the sense that they do make them. Like, they'll make them because they have a certain worldview.
Yeah.
Foxes, on the other hand, are always looking out for more information. And they're actually always thinking that, well, if I need more information to make sure I'm making the right decision. And so they're constantly seeking and seeking. And he said, like, once they make a decision, it's a very good one, but it takes a long time to make a decision.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I love that concept. That's so interesting. I was almost thinking that hedgehogs were going to be sort of the more like self-protective, and foxes were going to be more vicious, but it's completely different concept. That's so interesting. I do see a lot of the sensitive clients that I work with behave, I would say, more like foxes, at least the ones that I see in therapy, the people who are like, who are really reflecting and wanting to work on themselves and wanting to work on their relationships, that they're taking in lots of stimuli, lots of information, lots of perspectives, and it can really crowd out the decision-making process. I can think of several people I'm working with right now, honestly, for whom this is a challenge, to distill down what is actually best for them, because there's so many perspectives, there's so many paths. And you know, one of the aspects of being on the sensitive side for some people anyway, is really sort of processing things deeply. And part of that is thinking deeply about, okay, well, what matters to me, and really living an intentional life. Usually it translates into like an intentional career for people who are doing that. Typically people are not looking to settle for just like, it's okay, if it's okay. No, they want something that's values aligned. They want something
meaningful,
growing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so even in the career search process, there can be people who get really stuck or career redirection or moving around where, oh, well, I've heard this from this person said this, and then this program over here is doing that, and this job, blah, blah, blah. And there's many pieces of information coming in. So I'm guessing you've seen that in your work with people as well. And it can be really important to find some ways to, at some points, make a choice, or to start to narrow things down, and also to honor that that our lives, our careers even, are a work in progress, that we, even if we decide, hey, 10 years down the road, I'm doing something completely different, that often, if we're staying aligned, what we do ends up sort of stair-stepping into the next aspects, the next stages of our career or our life.
Yeah. There's another concept that I think about a lot, I share with my clients, is like, one thing is, I find that we often think of our careers and our lives as though it's like a book, right? Like there's a story, we want to make sure we're living the right story. So that can trip people up, right? Not wanting to make the wrong decision or something I'll regret. And, they see it as like this story. And I kind of see it as do you remember the choose your own adventure stories?
Yes.
Right? I'm probably still around. Again, those are
Yeah.
my favorite stories. And I feel like our lives and careers are a bit more like a choose your own adventure, where you get to the end of a chapter and you make a choice. Then you go to that one, and if you fall off the cliff, then you start at the beginning again. Like you can always restart, like it's a little bit like a video game too, right? You can always restart, try new paths, and do different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I use this image sometimes around, going down. It's almost like the Robert Frost poem of two roads diverged in a yellow wood. And I think we have, kind of unlimited roads, which can be it can be daunting. It can be unnerving to see that in front of you. But I like this image of the fox that kind of like sniffs, it kind of explores down one path. It takes in some information from this way. Well, how does that feel? How does it feel to consider that career path or that position or that responsibility? Ooh, I don't, no, something's off about that. I'm going to use my senses, my intuition to kind of try this out. Okay, I'm going to go down this. Oh, maybe I'm going to make it, a right turn and get back to a different trail. So I'm also like an ecotherapist, nature-based person. So I have lots of nature metaphors floating around in my head here. But yeah, I love this idea of the fox and not having a fixed, open and closed career path. In many ways, it's much more exciting for me to think about it as, what's next. And I can choose. And even if this thing that I'm really feeling a lot of anxiety about doesn't come through, there's an invitation to learn from that, to move to something that maybe is a better fit. But it can be really hard for people, I think, when they're stuck in that stressful situation to see what it is that you're describing, is that there's these paths. It's not just a prescribed book of what's next.
How to do it. Yeah, what I hear a lot about, there's a couple of common emotions I hear. People worry about regret and making the wrong decisions. They worry about regretting. And sometimes I ask them, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this, because it's kind of like, it's a bit of a I don't know if harsh is the right word, but bit of a like, cold water maybe is a better term question. But sometimes I'll ask them like, well, I'll say your life is a series of choices. Like we are only, at least, until we transcend to become a higher being of some kind, like we just have the one person, this one timeline that we can be. So we can't do everything. We can't be everything. Yeah. So there will always be some kind of regret. Like there will always be, because we can't do. And then I ask, well, which regret would you rather have?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that cuts right to the heart of it, right? So it's clarifying. So it's totally a bucket of cold water, but I think in a helpful way for people, where I think when people are paralyzed by indecision, which I see happen a lot with people who are more sensitive or have that, internal awareness that's so strong, they get paralyzed in decision making. And to be able to say, I sometimes say something similar, like either way, there might be a negative outcome, right? Choice A, choice B, you or someone else might have a negative impact from making that choice. And you can focus on, what if this job goes badly? Okay, but like staying in your current job or career path that is not working, there's a negative to that too, right? So like not getting just stuck on the one regret of making the change, which often feels more intense or overwhelming for people who are a little more quietly sensitive. But noticing what's not working right now. And that is something I do see people get stuck a lot in not wanting to make a change because of the unknown, because of fears of things going off or making the wrong choice, as you described. And undervaluing or under recognizing what's not working or what they're regretting in their current position.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and probably this, I'm guessing the same for you. Like, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think
Mm,
like some people's fears are not even necessarily like emotion, like there's the emotion-based fears of like, oh my
yeah.
gosh, what does it work out? And there's all that fear. But sometimes it's an economic fear, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm worried if I start making it, if I make a change, and especially if it doesn't work out, I'll lose my livelihood. Like how am I, can I support my family?
Mhm.
Like there is a little bit of that
Mhm.
undertone, especially and again, whether it's real or not, like maybe
Yeah.
they're in a position where it's very unlikely they would actually lose their job, but still that
Mhm.
fear of financial security can be so real.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people like that's the regret they you know, asking the question of which regret would you rather have doesn't necessarily mean that everyone lands on, oh, well, obviously I have to go to pursue this career. Like in
Yeah.
some cases, people say like, you know what, I'd rather regret, I'd rather be almost be like a little bit wistful about not taking it. But
Mhm.
right now, security is most
Yeah.
important. Right now, stability is most important. And
Mhm.
then probably the same for you as well. But then what we do in with, the coaching, or you can speak better to if it's in the therapy part, area as well. Then you
Mhm.
work on like, okay, well, how can we make things better where you are right now?
Yeah. Oh,
Right. If
absolutely. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Boundary setting, self-advocacy, often, recognizing your own strengths too. That's often something that people who are highly sensitive or quietly ambitious, as you call it, are maybe not see, they're focusing on the negatives or where they're falling short rather than really seeing all of the ways in which they are thriving, or that all the ways in which they could be thriving if the sort of the internal monitoring was just turned down a little bit, and their own self-worth and self-care and self-respect or honoring in their work was turned up a little bit more. So just like finding that the rebalancing that helps. I know I've personally experienced this in my work as a therapist too, of kind of overextending at my own expense and then realizing like, whoa, like this is out of whack. In order for this career to be sustainable, I need to fix it, to lower my caseload, or to take some more time for myself, or whatever it is that needs to be rebalanced in order for me to thrive in this job. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're really hitting on something. So my one of my main programs I run is a boot camp, a leadership boot. It's called
Mhm.
Rise Leadership Boot Camp, and it's like about getting promoted without being loud or pushy.
Mm.
And the first part of it, a good half, maybe even a little bit more, depending how you calculate it, is like the introspection about what are your values, what are your strengths, what's the energy that you're bringing to a situation. And what I find is so powerful for people, and like especially people on the more sensitive side, is they just realize like, wow, like the strengths I bring to the table and my values, they're different than what I've seen promoted in the past. They're different than the flashy, look at me kind of style.
Yeah.
And they start realizing that they've received messages in the past that they either need to change, or that it should be, other styles are more promotable. And
Yeah.
I find such an impact from people can look within and they can say, oh, these are my strengths. This is who I am. And it may not have been seen, and kind of come to
Mhm.
actually a place of compassion for past managers who just couldn't see it. It's not what being angry, but it's well, just realizing, oh, they didn't see it. And that's too bad that they
Mhm.
missed that. But,
Mhm.
this is me. This is who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, because it incorporates, people's own self-awareness and their own yeah, self-honoring. I love the word honoring, self-honoring, and it starts to move people towards I would imagine maybe later in the program there's ways that people can kind of advocate for themselves, or to help other people understand what their strengths are, or where they're contributing that might be less visible than other types of strengths. Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. But yeah, the internal work absolutely has to, I think, come first in order for people to, or at least be concurrent in order for people to start moving their career in the direction that feels good for them, or to find the visibility that they're wanting.
Yeah, for sure. There's a phrase I ran across. So one of the modules is, I call it on natural leadership competencies. And we kind of dig into this. And it's this phrase, it says, as within, so without.
Mm.
And I've done I need to keep doing more research because I have not been able to verify the origin of that. It's been attributed to lots of different authors.
I would imagine, yeah. Yeah.
But it's the idea that, you know, what you create within yourself, that's what manifests outside. So it's getting a little bit into the woo concept, but in leadership, I feel, and probably the same with parenting, I would imagine too, right? Like, you know, how we feel within ourselves that manifests outside of ourselves. And then I think, especially for the more sensitive or high self-monitors, I always like to say too, it's like, it's so important to have that and to like go within first, that strength from within first before without, because otherwise it flips and it becomes so without as within. And we're letting the outside dictate who we are inside.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So true. It's interesting. Thank you for bringing up the parallel with parenting, and I've seen that with the career and the you know, work life, but it's so true with parenthood as well. And in fact, one of my main courses, highly sensitive parenthood course, is structured in a very similar way to yours. It sounds like, where most of the course is through the lens of how are you? Like, it's actually not really about parenting. It's more about
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the parent themselves, and beyond the role of being a parent as well, but it looks at your own values, your own self-care, your own identity that's not part of parenthood necessarily, because in order to be a healthy, thriving parent, you need to tend to yourself first. And it's really, unfortunately, in many ways countercultural. And I've run into a lot of clients for whom doing that feels selfish. I hear that a lot. It's selfish to take care of myself. If I don't want to be around my child all the time, then like I'm a bad parent for doing that.
Horrible person. Yeah.
Right? Like I shouldn't have had kids. Like I wanted kids, and now like I'm overwhelmed by them. Like that's messed up. Or I find my child overstimulating, and I feel so guilty about it. And in many ways, that there's parallels with work, where like sometimes it's about balance, and it's about recognizing. I mean, I hit it over the head in the course, really about recognizing your strengths. So it's a similar framework almost, where maybe people are coming to us in our respective niches saying like, ow, like this is painful for me. I'm not seen, or I'm like massively overwhelmed. Something feels off. And to be able to start from a place of saying, validating that and saying like, yeah, that is happening, because maybe the systems that are in place are not always very friendly to people who are that high self-monitoring, the HSP. I know for, you know, in family life, I'm in the United States and in California, and, you know, like there's a lot of pressures, and families are spread out a lot of the time, and people don't have the support they really deserve as parents. And so they find themselves completely stretched thin and overwhelmed and feeling like there's something wrong with them. Whereas really a lot of it's systemic, that like, you know, our culture is not really set up to support parents very well, or especially working parents who are working outside the home, and especially highly sensitive or quietly ambitious people. You know, like there's some systemic aspects to what's going on that I think are important for people to understand, alongside their own awareness of how the same traits and the same parts of themselves that are leading to some of this pain and challenge are also huge gifts and strengths that should be celebrated and leveraged. And so starting from a place of reevaluating and kind of rewriting the narrative around who they are, who you are as a parent or as a professional, and really validating having your own strengths validated and supported, that creates such a springboard for people to make the changes that they need to make, whether in parenting or work.
Yeah. Or sometimes doing the both, right? Now that
yes. Yeah. So that's what and I guess we're coming towards like where we meet in the middle here, is that you mentioned that some of your work is with parents, and some of my work, even though I'm primarily with parents, a lot of the times it does go into work and work-life balance. And being a professional who is sensitive or empathic. So yeah, I know we had some questions that people had submitted. I'm curious to hear what people are wanting to know.
Yeah, we did. I was just thinking that too. Okay, so here we've got, okay, so this is a great one. So this is touching more on the parenting side. So my challenge of being a parent at HSP is the overstimulation of sound and touch for my little one. She wants to touch me and be held a lot more than I want to. And it can be hard not to react when she reaches for me while I'm trying to do something.
Yeah, I feel that one. I've been there personally. Honestly, that exact thing was probably the single hardest thing about parenting for me. The physical touch and overstimulation from my children. I think there's a couple things that I want to say about that. One is that tends to change over time. I don't know how old this person's child is, but I know during the infancy and toddler stage, it was really intense, almost more intense during the toddler stage, because infants are, they're there, but they're just laying there, right?
They're not doing much.
There's a lot of this like percussive, like this or like tugging and kind of like non-consensual in some ways, like of your body, which can feel really bad. It can just feel really bad. And then with a lot of parents, and in myself included, one of the biggest challenges there was guilt over, well, I don't want to be irritable. I don't want to tell my child to get off or to stop touching me. So there can be this barrier there. And I do think that when they're in that toddler stage, there are some ways. So I'm kind of making an assumption based on how this person described it, that maybe they have a toddler or preschooler. There are some ways to positively state your needs for physical space. And some of that is about delaying. So for example, saying, you know what, mommy just needs my own space right now. Let's plan on cuddling in just a few minutes. And you could set a timer. You can say like, here's our cuddle corner, or even setting some boundaries. And think of it as actually teaching them to advocate for their own personal space too, and their own preferences. You're modeling that for them, right? So let's say you're at the stove, that's one of the ones that always got me extra overwhelmed, is like I have open flame, or, I have a hot kid, and they're coming up and they're needing attention, and just naming, hi honey, like, I know I want to cuddle you too, or like, I know you want to read, or you need something from me. Give me just a moment if I just need a moment, or why don't you go wait over here, and then I'll when I'm done with this thing, I'll come cuddle with you. So kind of starting to set some parameters, and even in terms of how you're talking about it, can be really important. I do think one of my biggest simple recommendations is just wearing earplugs. If you have those, you can still totally hear your kid. If you can't, then don't wear them, but usually you can. It's just the volume's turned down a little bit, and that can really, really help with the sensory overstimulation. I'm trying to think if I have any other quick tips on that, but it is really hard. And my kids are older now, and that aspect of parenting has gotten a lot more manageable and less intense for me over the years. A lot of HSP parents that I've talked to have, take long bathroom breaks, go sit in their closet, go on walks. So just finding these like micro breaks where nobody is touching you, and doing your best to do those with as minimal guilt as possible, knowing that you are actually going to show up and be a quote better parent, whatever that looks like for you, for having taken that time to kind of regulate your nervous system by having your space protected for a little bit.
Yeah. And do you want to speak a bit too about the I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but thinking about the self-compassion, like if someone does kind of because they talked about reacting and like, oh, I'm trying not to react, but we're all human and we might have reactions and we might not feel good about them. I feel like self-compassion can be so important in those moments.
Yeah. I think absolutely self-compassion, knowing that, a couple of ways to frame that I think can be helpful or have been helpful for me and my clients around self-compassion in this particular example. One of which is, just because your child is creating overstimulation for you says absolutely nothing about how much you love or care for your child. And I think a lot of people conflate that, and they think that they, like I said, are a bad parent, or that they are not cut out to be a parent, or that they are somehow deficient because their child is a source of overstimulation. It's kind of the same. Think about it as like when you hear like really loud. I used to have a dishwasher that made like the worst noise in the world. It was like, "Rah, rah, rah," and eventually I replaced it and got a different model. But it wasn't that my dishwasher was bad, or that I like was taking bad care of it, or that like I had any sort of feelings. It just, the noise it caused a physical sensation in my body, and an emotional reaction sometimes too. When I became aware of that and kind of disconnected, it's a little weird to compare a child to a dishwasher. I understand that, but like when you can disconnect that they are overstimulating from the fact that they are your child a little bit, it can help reduce some of that guilt that you are allowed to be overstimulated by your child. Like it's just a reality. They're noisy, they're sticky, they pull on you, right? Like you can fully love your kid and really dislike the noise that they make, the tugging, the textures. So I think it's important for people to start to consider how they can separate out loving their child and not liking some things about just like the sensations that a child can create. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. And then the other idea here that I want to share is just going back to this idea of many of us are lacking that village and don't realize that parents really, our nervous systems are not cut out to be with children. I believe anyway, mine isn't. Our nervous systems aren't cut out to be with kids 24/7. And a lot of us think that they are, like that like a good parent, or at least that's a narrative that's buried deep for a lot of people that I work with, is good parents like want to be with their kids all the time and want to be like really active and playful and like interactive with their kids all the time. And if we think about much of human history, we lived largely in, villages and communities where our childcare was shared across many different people. And we weren't with our kids all the time. We had siblings taking care of younger siblings. We had cousins, we had aunts, we had grandparents who were there, and we weren't with our kids anywhere close to 24/7. And so just recognizing that, as I said earlier, there's some systemic factors that really kind of are making our lives quite a bit harder as modern day parents, many of us. I think that can help to build some self-compassion too. Just that perspective shift that like, I'm not suddenly deficient. I'm not deficient because I don't want to be with my kid all the time. There's not something that's wrong with me because I find my child to be overstimulating. It's okay that I feel this way. And really to know that once you start accepting that, I mean, I've seen this over and over in my own experience and with clients, that and you start to recognize, hey, I actually really need this amount of quiet time, or I really need to go outside and take a walk, and realizing how much better you feel and how much more you can show up to be the parent that you want to be. It starts to become easier to be self-compassionate and to make self-compassionate choices to as a parent, as a person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So they had a follow-on question that sort of links over into the work side of the world. And they're looking for how to get into work mode quicker. So it takes time for me to unwind from mama mode into work mode. So tools for transitions throughout the day. So I have kind of a quick tip that that I have found really useful, and I've shared with others before that people have found useful as well. I wanted to share with people.
Yeah.
And it is, it involves a grid. So if you think of like grid paper, I used to do this like just on Word. I would kind of create a table and print, I would print it off so I could hand write it. There's really interesting research about the connection between like mind body connection. When you get off your computer and onto like physical paper using your hand, you're connecting your mind and your body together in that moment. It's kind of like, again, it's a little bit more on the woo side, and I'm a trained economist, so I bring up all these woo things full well having been trained as like science or social science anyways, the economics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I hear you. I love that. I'm an ecotherapist, and it has the same sort of vibes where people are like, oh, like tree hugging and stuff. And I'm like, oh, but the research, you just have to read all the
the research is so fascinating.
Yeah, the terpenes in the air, how those impact our nervous systems, and how there's studies about how, green space, it increases our ability to concentrate and focus and retain information. Anyway, so like I'm right there with you on things that sound woo on the surface,
Yes.
in fact, are very much based in scientific research. So
Yes.
anyway, go on.
Yes, we could completely have a different conversation. We nerd out about the research, and so I do recommend it like as a table. And what you do is you come up with a set of really simple tasks or things to do that basically start your day. And I mean like really simple. And what you're essentially doing is coming up with a set routine, but it's almost like this like morning ritual that you do. And like first thing would be turn on the computer. Like literally that simple, right? And actually the turn on the computer one is something I don't even think it was until I was preparing for this that I really thought about. It means you turned off your computer the night before. You didn't just put into sleep mode. You actually turned off your computer at the end of the day. So that, which is important for the end of the day, but also in the morning, the reason you want to turn it on instead of just wake it up is that is part of the ritual, that bit of time it takes to start up. Then you might do like position, if it like position your chair, like let's say if you're at a sit stand desk, position your computer. What are some of the like things like that? It's not check email. Check email does not belong on this list at all. You are not allowed to check your email until you've gone through the list. It might be make coffee. That might be part of the ritual. Once you're like, this is my get into work mode ritual to be make a coffee. And what I really recommend for a couple of reasons, but it actually kind of leads into productivity side of things, is you set your big three. What are your big three, your top three things that you're going to get done that day? And again, you're doing this before you check email because you want them to be your priorities, not someone else's.
I love that.
Okay?
Yeah.
So you come up with 4 or 5 or 6, and just having it alone is enough. But I like the grid and the checks or check boxes. Like, so how you do the grid is you have enough space on the first column, like the left column, where you can write out your things you're doing. And then the rest of the grid are basically spaces for check boxes. So they can be much narrower columns and rows. And every day you check it as you do it. And especially when you can, it's almost like in your mind, you're like, I am going into work mode. I'm going, and it's kind of, there's a bit of a rhythmic nature to it. There's no thinking involved. You're just, and you use it. You don't just do it. You use it to get into work mode, if that makes sense. So it's not just the act of it, but you're using it intentionally. Like you're being mindful about, I am now getting into work mode. And then you've got your big three as your last thing. You set your big three and whatever system you have for that. Like I would always have a journal and just like I had to have a journal literally like every day. I'd have a big three, big three, big three. And that was my set of 3 things I would get done that day.
Wow, I've never heard of that system before, but are the grids, but I think that's really powerful. And I love that you brought up this idea of the routine. And I think that tends to serve the people we work with really well, is to kind of have this prescribed but very intentional and thoughtful and aligned routine that helps to not only to kind of help to organize this, but to signal to our brains and bodies, hello, now you are transitioning to this role and this rhythm of your day. And, it's really, I was thinking as you're describing turning off the computer versus putting it to sleep. And it reminds me of during the pandemic, when at least down here in San Diego, we were all like, everyone's working from home, like people's offices were like in their bedrooms because space is tight, and it was a madhouse. People it caused poor work-life boundaries for everybody, but especially when there's space challenges and kids and that kind of thing. When I'm in my home office right now, and I can actually hear my kids out there right now, but when we were all together all day, it really was like there was no buffer time, and that buffer in between activities is actually pretty well documented, that people who are more sensitive absolutely need for our cognitive health that buffer time. And so I would advise people to do that exact thing. Close your computer, and if it's a room that is a multi-purpose room, put it away, put it in its case, put it in a closet and close the closet door. Or if it's in an office, close your office door. Put your desk away if you have a desk that can fold up, whatever it is that you can do, clear your desk off. So kind of create this there's almost like a physical aspect of also the wind down. That's often what I have focused on more with people. So I like that you took kind of like the getting into work mode, but I've talked with a lot of people about, well, how do you transition from, this, like being on with clients or coworkers or doing your work tasks, and then all of a sudden your kids get home or you have to run pick them up, and it's, what about dinner? Okay, the homework and cleaning out the backpack, blah, blah, blah. There's all these different things that are going on or that you need to attend to with younger children as well. And I think it's so important to have that buffer time. If you can, as long as you can reasonably take, is great. For many people, it feels like they can't take more than like 5 or so minutes. But even taking that to, like you said, turn things off, put them away. If you can, another couple of little tips I have is like listening to a favorite song, taking a brief walk if you can, that can really help reset. Watching a quick like funny video to kind of like create a little separation between kind of your fixation or your thoughts about whatever was going on in the workday, and kind of signal that there's a transition. So I think having that time, and a lot of us who are working from home or working remotely at this point, we've almost lost out. I actually read an article about this recently about how losing commutes has some negative impacts as well, that we don't have that period of time, especially working parents don't have that period of time to where they're like kind of in this like neither here nor there responsibility. They're just they can listen to a podcast, they can have silence. And I've noticed at times when I had longer commutes, I've actually had a lot easier time with the transition versus like a really short commute between my work and a kid's daycare or something like that. So just something to think about.
Yeah, that makes actually the thing about the commute, like the difference between the transition, the imagery that comes to my mind is like a sponge. It's like we're so squeezed all the time, and you need the periods, and give yourself that space for the sponge to come back out, recognizing like, we're going to have that squeeze. Like that's kind of a part of life, right? Depending on what we're doing. For most people, there is that stress. Like and again, with the research, there's a lot of research that, stress, quote, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the too much stress and no recovery from stress and going well beyond what we can handle. But stress just, like the right amount of stress keeps us sharp, keeps us on our game. We can do things. We also need to recover, and like that's that spot when that sponge has a chance to kind of come back out and expand again.
Yeah, I love that metaphor, that symbolism. And I think in general, people who are really aware, have this high EQ, like you talked about earlier, our sponges tend to get squeezed more by what's going on around us, right? So at least in my field, there's as a therapist, there's actually some groups and some people who work with highly sensitive therapists. And many of us, we just have learned through experience, often hard-earned wisdom, that our caseloads just have to be smaller. And we can't see, 5 people back to back and then another few people in the after. Like we just can't, we don't function. We can't function doing that. And so it looks different for different people, but spreading out meetings or trying to do a 4-day work week or whatever, it looks different, but it's really noticing like, oh, people who are in this field who are not as sensitive or not as tapped into EQ, they can see more people, and it's kind of slow squeezing of the sponge. But for us, it's like, whoa, like it's a little bit warp speed. And then we need to really account for that buffer time, that recovery time. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. And it's not a luxury, but it can feel like it in a culture that kind of views it as a luxury, kind of views it as a privilege in many ways, to have the time or to have the flexibility to recover.
Yeah. Well, and especially where we have so many stories and narratives about people rising to the occasion and perseverance. And like we really glorify that hard work and overcoming that. I think it can be so easy for people to feel like, well, I should be able to handle this. Like why, I don't, and maybe you don't even see your colleagues needing it as much. So you can get into that comparison game a bit as well, which can be tough.
Yes.
You said something there that actually segues really nicely. And I know we're running kind of close to time here, but this is a great question, I thought, for a lot of people, because they said how fellow HSPs manage the overwhelm with work, and then in brackets, leading a team, and home demands, in brackets, raising 2 toddlers.
Oh, boy.
We had another question too of someone who had 3 young ones. So yeah, especially having multiples. So yeah, it's a very real challenge, both being more sensitive, whether high self-monitor, HSP in this case, in the workplace, leading a team, and then also balancing at home. So I'll say on the work piece, and I'll let you chime in on the home piece. On the work piece with the overwhelm, so there's a little bit of, if this person was here, I'd probably ask some more questions about what was leading to the overwhelm. We probably like tease out a bit, do a little bit of coaching, but so my answers will be a little bit more generic in this case. A couple of things that come to mind. One is what I've noticed for a lot of people, and this is especially for sensitive souls, is that we can take on a lot of other people's challenges and difficulties, like we feel it ourselves. So part of it's figuring out for yourself, like, okay, how can I be there for my team? And especially over the last few years, it's hard. It's been really hard to lead and be a strong manager over the pandemic. But so how can I support them and be supportive while still protecting my own energy? Or how can what are some ways that work for me it's like a sponge piece to kind of come back from it. So figuring out what works for you, and especially if you can find ways that work for you fairly kind of quickly, like, if you are so lucky to have trees nearby or a park, because I'm with you on that, Amy, like if you can get out for a walk, and you've just had a really difficult conversation with an employee, and you need to take that time, that is so critical. So you can, that sponge can go back out. Or as I have one client called it her empathy bucket. She said, my empathy bucket is empty. It's like, so we need to figure out, okay, how can we refill it, but also making sure, okay, like, are there holes there that we need to patch up? So that's that protective piece. So there's that. The other piece I find for a lot of people is that between both sensitivity, but also this is just very natural in the workplace, is that we often want to solve problems for other people. So we don't just take on their problems energetically, but we actually think that our role is to solve, because I'm the manager, I'm supposed to know, or that's what you've always seen. You've always been told by your boss what to do. So I really highly recommend getting some coaching skills in there, like coaching for managers. There's a great book called The Coaching Habit. Very great, very simple approach to coaching. Or the 1 minute, the new 1 minute manager is another great book with some coaching. And basically you get this, you develop the skill to help your employees solve their own problems. And it happens it takes a little while to develop the skill and to get your employees used to it. But once you get it down, you don't have to take on their problems because they're solving their own problems. That's another. Okay, so that's like one of the most critical skills, not just for, like in this case, it helps you with the overwhelm, so you're not taking on the problems, but it also makes you a much better manager, a much better leader, because you are then supporting people. And yeah, you're still a manager, you're still a supervisor. Like if they're coming up with solutions that they can't do for whatever reason, like for whatever reason can't do it, then you can step in, you can put on your supervisor hat on again, or your manager hat, and work on teaching them. But that's a teaching role versus a coaching role. So there's that. And then the other piece is this can be hard. I'll completely acknowledge, especially for our HSP or sensitive folks, is advocating for your team, seeing what, is your team, or are you taking on too much? Do you need to go to your senior leaders, your senior management, and have some honest conversations, some really candid conversations? You can go to them. You just see what your role is, like what they're going to expect from you is that you will sit down and look at the work. Like I'm looking down at my desk. Is it like you're going to look at your actual work, look at your, the support you have from both your team as well as outside your team, and just have a realistic sense of what can be done. And then prioritize, like in your mind, like here are the priorities, here are the things that we can't do right now. And then you go to your senior leaders and you say, okay, here's the reality, like until we have more support, here's what we can do. We can't deliver on these other things. Yeah. And they, in some cases, they'll disagree with you, flat out agree. And a lot of other times you're going to find out, no, that they're going to ask you, they're going to tell you what their priorities are a little bit different. And you're going to reprioritize some of those. That's a really, really important skill. And I completely acknowledge it's a hard one. Like it's a tougher one, and it might be depleting as well, but really, really critical skill.
Oh, those are all such valuable tips. I love all of those. And I do think that self-advocacy piece, or that prioritizing or recognizing, I can't do it all. And I might not deliver on something that somebody wants me to deliver on, that can be really sticky for some of us. But I wanted to go back to that and kind of draw a line between work and parenthood with the second point you made around being a manager, and really making sure if that is your role, in fact, that you are focusing on whatever that role is. And maybe you're not a manager, maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a therapist, and maybe you have a specific role. The important thing is you have a specific role, right? But let's use this idea of a manager, and you bring up a great point that the manager's job is to manage. They're executing on something, sure, but they're not taking care of like the lower level tasks, right? They're not always executing on all these small little discrete tasks. And one thing that can happen for parents, and especially for mothers, is that they end up, not always, but a lot of the time, they end up taking on the managerial tasks of parenting, which are increasingly complex in today's world, right? We have volunteering, we have kids sports, we have extracurriculars, we have homework, we have expectations that we'll support our kids with therapies or other types of things that they might need. So really, there's a complex, even just managing the family, thinking about meal planning, switching out kids' clothes seasonally, all these different things, right? So there's all the logistical planning, and then there's actually executing on those tasks. And often, I mostly work with women. Often the women who are working professionally are unfortunately still taking on the bulk of both the managerial and the execution of the tasks. Even if their partner is really willing and they're saying, oh, no, we want to split things 50-50, they still are not accounting for the kind of the managerial work that takes place around keeping the household running. And I think it's important to consider, to really value that as a role, that sort of executive functioning and the household manager role is real and legitimate, even if it's not as visible to other people. And that said, that especially for people who are working, even part-time outside of the house, and even people who are full-time at home, honestly. But especially for people who are working full-time outside the home and expecting themselves to not delegate any tasks of household to other people is, I would say, for like the vast majority of people, it's setting yourself up for massive overwhelm and sense of failure, because there simply are not enough hours in the day to, in my opinion, to work full-time outside of the home, to successfully run a household to the level that most sensitive people want to run it at, right? We hold ourselves to a high standard as parents, as creators of a peaceful environment at home. We want, and honestly, we need, our nervous systems need for things to be relatively peaceful on the home front a lot of the time. We really benefit from that. And so I have, a lot of the clients that I've worked with, and again, me personally, have had to make some decisions around, okay, how do I use my resources? If I'm working outside of the home and contributing in that way, can I reallocate some of that to support me and my family and how things are run at home? And that can look all sorts of different ways. It can look like choosing to do like meal delivery services or meal kits. I've done that on and off during really busy periods. Having people come help clean your house. For newer parents, having like laundry service. And a lot of people really struggle with the idea that this is, that these things are a privilege. And to some extent, I agree with it. And they say, well, I feel bad. Other parents don't have that luxury. They don't have that privilege. And there's a yes and that for me, it's like, that is true, but it does not mean that you should just suffer and bear it, because it's also not fair. Nobody should have to hold a full-time job and manage a household and execute all of the tasks associated with household and parenting. So, finding ways on the work front to reduce the intensity when that's appropriate and and accessible. And then also finding ways to reduce the workload on the home front. If you're partnered, having conversations with a partner is often a really important part of that. That can take some time to recalibrate and to adjust. When I've worked with people on that, sometimes couples therapy is helpful with that. But often we just need a lot more support than we think we do. Or at least that's been my experience. And when we start adding in some buffer time, when we start adding in some support, when we start saying, okay, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit on how healthy our meals are or how cheap my meals are in order to have some more downtime. That's just an example. We realize actually that is how I want to allocate my resources of time, energy, money right now. And it can shift over time, but really just being honest with yourself about how to use your resources, all of those resources wisely, in order to create as balanced and as low stress of a life as you can during the time when you're parenting, especially young children and working outside the home.
Yeah. Well, and that is bringing us to the end, but that was wonderful, Amy. There's so much in there, and I hope everyone who's been watching has really enjoyed this and taken away lots of nuggets for both on the work side as well as on the home side, and especially realizing like how much we see you. We know that doing, just like Amy was saying, like doing all of it is, have all these expectations, and sometimes just having a little bit of grace and realizing that, things, it is hard, and we see you, and it's okay to ask for help and to seek out help.
Yeah, in many cases, it's critical for people to seek out help. And yeah, I just have seen it over and over. People be resistant, and then once they do it or they make these shifts, they're like, oh, why didn't I do that earlier? This is I needed this. Like I needed this to be okay. And so yeah, if you're on the fence about it, I would say, start small, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe it's hiring a babysitter to come a couple hours a week and taking care of your own needs during that time. Maybe it is having, one of my sisters does like a pizza Friday, and they just order pizza on Friday. So no one has to think about making dinner at home or, having a big cleanup. So it could be little things like that, just little adjustments, and see what's the final equation of that? Like, does that is that more beneficial, even though that maybe there's some trade-offs in there? And just noticing, just being honest with yourself and honoring what you're needing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this fireside chat, this casual conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, yeah, it has. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, if people want to connect with me, I am on Instagram at Highly Sensitive Parenthood and at Inner Nature Therapy. And those are the URLs of both my websites too, highlysensitiveparenthood.com and innernaturetherapy.com. And I'd love to connect with anyone who is interested to hear more and looking for more support. You can reach out to me via either of those websites or at amy@highlysensitiveparenthood.com.
Awesome. And for me, I'm at The Mint Ambition, both on Instagram and same as my website, or you can also come find me on LinkedIn if you like. I like to share things around career on there as well. Yeah, we would both love to connect with you and hear from you as well, what your thoughts were and what nuggets you took away. So thank you.
For more resources, including our signature Highly Sensitive Parenthood online course, visit highlysensitiveparenthood.com.